Um,
So just for the first question, that exception mean
mhm,
exceptional condition. So
correct.
how will you differentiate that? How will compiler differentiate the error and exception?
So basically, an exception is something that you can catch, right? Something that you will write a try and catch code, but one error is something that you cannot control, and it will crash the program. It will crash the program, right? The program will crash, and you cannot control that with an error. But with an exception, you can stop a program from crashing.
Right.
So basically, I have written um, error versus exceptions, when you are comparing an error versus exception. But I want to go into this detail after I talk more about the exceptions, right? But here we are. When you are trying to recover from an error, right?
Right.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
But
Means
if
which
you
cannot be handled is called error, and which can be is type of exception.
correct,
Yeah.
yes, yes, very. It's the way we can say summarize, right?
Right.
Okay.
So can you brief out any of the real world example to differentiate that what is the error and what is exception?
Yes. So basically, in here, I have written an hierarchy. Do you see in here? I have taken this from a bench source.net. This little beautiful um tree in here, and we have here that an exception comes from the throwable class, and we have also the error. We have on the error, we have stack overflow errors or out of memory errors.
Mm.
Also, one example in real world of what would be an error. Let's say you have your program running, and probably somebody walks into the room, and maybe where the program is running, the computer is plugged, and somebody doesn't realize they just unplug the computer. That is, and then the program crashes. Like, for example, if you have a server running somewhere and the server is unplugged, that is the server down, right? That could cause an error, right? That is
Right.
something that you can control, right? But when we're talking about exceptions, right? You can control arithmetic as exceptions. You can control, like, if somebody says, I am expecting this type of number, and somebody enters a letter, um, then you can say, basically, you can cache this, and it will not make the program to stop, right? You can
Right.
say, or maybe somebody give a very big numbers for a big calculation, and maybe your computer, maybe let's take from computers from the 1989, or computers from the to 2000, when somebody is doing some long calculation, and you have to do, let's say, a long loop, right, to do this calculation, and maybe that is so big, that the number is so big that the program will use a lot of the memory. If maybe the memory was not allocated properly, it will use a lot of the memory, and the program will, and as there could be a memory leak, and then therefore, the program could crash, right? If there was no an exception handling that type of big number, it could create an exception, right? Your own exception for that. Also, another example of an exception is like when you have when you're expecting a file name, right? And there is when you're expecting you want to open a file and you don't want to you want to make sure that the file is there, exists, right? If the file doesn't exist, the program will crash if you don't have an exception handler. It will say it will say file not found, and you cannot do anything with it, right? Because your program was waiting for that file to do the task. But if you are handling the exception, you will be able to say if the file is not found, do something else, right?
Right.
So correct, yeah. So
I
there,
also know one of the example real world. So that you have, I hope you don't have heard that the example is like that someone is driving a car in a road, okay,
mm-hmm.
and suddenly a small kid came into the front of the road and driver see from long far enough distance that a child is coming in the road, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so when the driver see the child is coming in the road, so he accidentally tries his brake and he just stop before the car touches to the child. So similar type of is a case that exceptional case was occurring. The exceptional case was that child was about to be hurt, but that was handled by the driver. So it's type of exception that is being handled by the car driver. So
Yeah.
if somehow the driver fails and does not stop his brake and the car hits the child, so it's type of error that you can't handle that one, and that caused the failure of your operation. So I would like to share
Correct.
that this is also a real world example.
Oh yes, that is a great analogy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you can
Um.
go, you can move forward. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So yes. That is a great example. Thank you for sharing. And this real is a real life example.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Comparing into humans. Yes. So um. So basically, we have a try and catch. To handle exceptions, one of the ways to handle the exceptions in the mechanism is having a try and catch, right? So basically, this is the syntax of a try and catch block, right? You have to try. In the try block, you will put the code that will cause the exception that you think is going to throw an exception, right?
right.
Then you have catch, right? You can have multiple catches, but there cannot be any code between try and catch. Like there cannot be a print statement outside this parenthesis. I mean, outside this curly brackets and before this catch. They have to be there. There shouldn't be any interruptions, right?
Yeah.
So basically, you have the catch. In the catch, you put the name of the exception that you want to catch, right? You have the first exception and the second exception. Uh, but when we're talking about putting exceptions in here, I wanted to say that sometimes we have to put the more specific ones first before going into the more general ones, because if you want to handle a specific um, exception and you put a general exception that covers everything, not going your if you put the general exception first, it's not going to perform the other it's not going to go to the other catches, right? It's not going to go to that specific code that you have for that specific exception.
Yeah.
So you have to try and catch, right?
So here I have a query that is there any possible relationship between my first exception and my second exception?
So basically, if there could be a relation, if the first exception is general and it covers all the exceptions, including the one that any exception that is like the second exception,
Yeah.
it will
Yeah.
not reach to the other catch, right?
Right.
But if the first exception only covers that specific exception that you want to catch, right?
Yeah.
It will be fine for you because you will be handling the try and catch correctly.
Yeah. So my just a simple example means it's lots of developer concern that means type of a question I have never tried this one that if I put my first exception and replace it with the exception class in Java, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and in the second my second exception I just want to replace with the throwable.
So
Can I do it?
uh so basically you can only have exceptions type, like they have to be of the exception parents of the exception, like they should be of the same class, right?
Yeah.
In the catch one, right? If you put
Right.
the general exception one that says exception itself, and it doesn't say it's like index out of bound exception, or it doesn't say let's say for example uh, IO exception, if it doesn't say that specific name, this is going to just treat any exception, any error that occurs, it's going to treat it as a regular general exception, and it will not give you any information. Like it will just give you the general error that it will give you, right? But with the more specific exception, you will get more information if you want to handle it that. Like if you want to get more information from that exception, right? We are going
Right.
to see some examples. Like I will share. Like we are going to do some examples on Eclipse, I guess. But
Yeah.
I also want to go ahead and show you another part of the try and catch that I haven't shown. I haven't shown just yet, and that is using the finally block, right?
Yeah.
So in the finally block, what you're going to have in there is going to be cleanup code, right? Anything like closing your files, releasing your network sockets, and maybe reallocating some memory resources. Um, in there, in the finally block, you want to have that code. The final upload will run. It's lowercase. Catch and finally should be lowercase in here. The final block um, will run. It doesn't matter if the exception is thrown or not.
Okay. So here the most important means it's a common question which came that in case of catch you exception block and you just do system dot exit then finally it does not execute.
Oh, the system that exit, right? Basically, your program will not execute, but we don't recommend to have system that exits, right? Depending on what do you want to do in there. Let's say, for example, let's say you do the close, right? You want to do, if you are dealing with opening a file, you do file that close or or let's see, for example, what else can we put in there? Yeah, scanners. If you are going to do some scan some files and scan some information inside the try and catch, you can close the scanner and so on. Um,
Yeah, sure.
there is mhm. There is some people that say maybe like they want to do like garbage collection, but garbage collection, mm, it's not recommended to call a system that you see or call the garbage collector here, even though because the garbage collector will act on its own, right? Okay, so now
Yeah,
that
right. We will
we
add that one garbage collection as a topic.
yeah, we can talk more about the garbage collector in a different time, right? But yes, the garbage collector uh will search for
Yeah, right.
the the let's say the unused resources, and it will get rid of it. Like let's say if you have a variable and it's like it's not linked with any object, then or if you unlink the variable, let's say if the variable was having the reference to an object, but then it's not longer being used, and then you are going to make the variable, you will set the variable to null, right? And then when there is no, if those object, the object that was there is still in the memory, but it's not referenced with any variable, right? There is the reference is not there anymore. So the garbage collector will just take the object that is not referenced anymore, and it's going to erase it.